Hello, and welcome to FortiGuard Live. I'm Derek Mankey, and I am joined and have the pleasure again of speaking with my esteemed colleague Amar Lakhani. How you doing, Amar?
I'm doing great running the marathon that I call life. Sometimes you're running, sometimes you're walking. My last marathon, I was actually crawling, but I'm doing good.
Hey, that's better than sitting, right? I don't think we're ever I don't think we're ever sitting around doing nothing, and that's the beauty of this job and in the industry is there's a lot of problems out there, but we're fighting hard to create solutions. And yeah, I feel the same way. It can be easily overwhelming sometimes when you look at the threat landscape and everything that's happening. But the good news is there's been so much developments. We've talked about it a lot before in terms of the technology piece, right? What we're doing at FortiGuard Labs with machine learning and AI and all the tools and assists, not to mention the brilliant minds we get to work with, at FortiGuard Labs, but also Cyber Threat Alliance and Interpol and all of our industry initiatives. Following all of that, like simplifying, if we're just to simplify in terms of new trends that we're seeing, in terms of the threat landscape, I know we've talked about COVID a lot in terms of threats. And the reality is, I just went back and looked at our data. We're well over 14, 15 months now into the pandemic. And it's very interesting because we saw a trend where the threats were actually dovetailing a bit in November, December last year. I'm talking about COVID-19 social engineering lures. So at that point in time, I thought, cyber criminals might start to get exhausted of that themselves or people. But it actually just started continuing, right? I looked at our data and it's a constant wave. Every week we see the same amount of volume we were seeing last January in terms of COVID-19 social engineering lures and attacks, mostly email-based. It just hasn't stopped. They take weekends off. We see a dip on the weekend, but it kicks back up on Monday. The difference is, of course, like we talked about, the theme is changing, right? They're going from, they went from initial lockdowns to the reopenings and now vaccine lures. But we're also seeing a theme now with a lot of impersonations for corporate IT security, and really it's leading to spear phishing attacks too.
Yeah, you know what's funny is like I myself thought, hey, this is kind of dying down. I'm not seeing that much of it. And when I really started looking at it, you're right, only the subjects change a little bit, the themes change a little bit. But on top of that, I think, and this is the dangerous part, I think that everyone's kind of getting a little numb to the fact that anytime a new attack happens, and we're just kind of bouncing it off and not really taking how serious it is. And as you mentioned, one good example of this is as people come to work, I've been seeing a really interesting attack where you're getting an email, a phishing email from an attacker that's impersonating your corporate IT, stating, hey, now that we're back to work, look out for phishing emails, look out for attackers, and make sure you're trained against them because they're going to come after you in the corporate world. And here's a link, and that link is a malicious link or a phishing email. So the bad guys are pretending to be good guys, warning you against the bad guys and doing bad things while they're doing it. So if you followed me, it's kind of ingenious of them to do that because that's on top of mind of every corporate IT organization right now is as people come back to the office, how are we going to get them back into mindset of corporate security?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. So there's a couple of things, right? One is everybody's still talking about COVID. It's on the news every day still. And that's why it's perfectly okay for cyber criminals to still leverage that. I think and talk. It's just front of mind still. It's a big topic still, and that's why we're continuing to see that be favored on a weekly basis. But it's really interesting what you talked about because we're seeing that also in the ransom as a service model, where they have these new. We talked about this before. These new service departments, right, where they say, "Hey, if you pay us a certain amount of money, we're going to try to benefit you. We're going to try to think like you as a defender and offer you consulting services, right? Tell you how we got into your network." But it really is sort of a shift in their mentality where just like on our side, we're always trying to get into the minds of an attacker. They're really starting to get more into the minds of a defender now. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, don't pay a malicious actor to go into your network. Pay some of the good guys, but you're right. I mean, the attackers are trying to think like the defenders, and once they do that, they're going to be able to get around the solutions. In fact, I've seen a lot of forums on hacker forums where attackers are actually suggesting to other attackers, hey, you know what, go get a job and in a corporate IT security department and learn kind of like the skills and the tools and the products that they use, so you can come back to us and let us know like how to defeat those products. So it's a cycle, and it's kind of funny you're seeing that type of suggestions and that kind of engagement on these hacker forums.
Yeah, definitely. And going off what I was saying before, the other trend, unfortunately, that we're seeing is that, before this, they were very successful just with the mass, quote unquote, mass marketing emails that they were doing, right? Like the broad attacks, they weren't targeted. It was just mass phishing. That was successful for a long period of time, but it's becoming less successful now, I think, because of all the security measures, a lot of the education piece things that we've done out of the industry. But unfortunately now they're starting to shift, because they're more well-funded, shift into these targeted attacks. That phishing is now leading to spear phishing being more common, to your point about reaching out directly, having these one-on-one channels with their targets and victims, and even in the emails themselves. We've seen things like BEC, business email compromise, which were in the past very targeted to CFOs and doing payment diversion fraud, that are now also being used for the same purpose, right? Get into an HR account or a IT admin account and use that to launch a second stage attack.
Right. I'm not sure if those mass emails are less successful, but what they definitely are they're not as lucrative. The one-on-one emails, I mean, instead of getting paid $100, for ransomware attacks, they're getting paid in the millions. I mean, we saw this over and over again with some of the very large, high-profile ransomware attacks that have come out. And just, it doesn't matter what week it is, because the last couple of weeks of high-profile ransomware attack has come out, and you see all the payouts are in the millions of dollars now. So what the attackers are trying to do is they're trying to target those organizations. They know they can pay. They know they have a reputation and other motivations to basically keep it under the radar and pay. And even the attackers, they kind of want to keep a low profile as well. They don't want to go way high. They want to ask for a lot of money where law enforcement will be involved and really targeting them and motivated to get them. But they want to keep it high enough where they make a lot of money and it's easy for their victim organizations to pay without thinking too much about it.
Yeah, definitely. And switching gears, putting our research hats on, and every day at FortiGuard Labs we go out on the threat hunt, right? So we can looking at hunting for the threats, not just reacting to the existing threats and fighting that, but trying to get ahead of the curve. This is all research, finding out what's out there, what are the latest targets, how do we think like an attacker, how do we get in their point of view, in their eyes, and follow their latest campaigns as an example too. One of the interesting things, I know we were talking about this before, is that we're starting to see problems. I think there's a lot of information disclosure that's happening, even with good intentions sometimes, that can have consequences. I mean, even when we go out and do our threat hunting and threat research, we're seeing people reach out for help in terms of potentially an attack. If they're being targeted, you just mentioned, don't hire a cyber criminal to help. But we also see people going to things like public open source platforms, samples of emails that are being floating around too, and that can create even more fuel for cyber criminals, because they can actually get access. Other gangs, cyber criminal gangs, can get access to that information and then use that for a spear phishing attack.
Man, that is such a great point. I go to a number of forums. I use a number of open source tools, such as open source sandboxes, honeypots, other tools as well. And you can actually, submit, file samples to a lot of these places and see kind of what the verdict is. And there are so many times where I've seen other people submit like, hey, a lot of these places will have look at the last 10 files uploaded. And someone will say, look, I got this email. I think it's a phishing email. They'll upload it and you'll see the verdict. But when you actually open up the email, it has very sensitive corporate information out there. And you have to be careful about that, because if I see that as a researcher, right, I'm like, oh, why did someone do that? Attackers are most likely going to the same websites and they don't have to do anything. They're just downloading the public information you've given them, but you haven't realized that anyone can get to that information. We see that all the time on multiple open source tools, and it's a big problem. And I would even go further to add in, like if you're actually sending things to any cloud provider or cloud vendor, you should know exactly what your vendor is doing with that. Are they treating that all internal, all your data, all your privacy? There's a lot of lot of places we can go with this, obviously. But how are they actually analyzing the threats you're sending them over to the cloud?
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think it's important to talk. It's important to ask the hard questions first. We've talked about this before with IoT devices, right? If you go to your big box store and buy an IoT device, asking the question first, it's really training and reinforcing your own mind first, right? What's the security lifecycle with this vendor for the device that I'm buying, as an example? If I plug this into my network, is it going to be able to communicate with my corporate laptop or other devices? Asking all those questions first goes a long way. It's the same thing with information. If I'm forwarding this email, if I'm asking for help and disclosing potentially sensitive information, who am I talking to? Do I need to actually disclose this information? Social media platforms are a huge example of this, right? We're talking more about the research community and security analysis, but beyond that, if you look at social media, we've talked about this before too, having that mentality of, if I post this, do I really want to be shouting this out loud to the world?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You reminded me of a story where I have a friend that does physical pen test security, and he actually went on an organization's social media site, and they were having some sort of costume day, like dress up day, and what he did was when he did his physical pen test, since he already knew the social media account, he just dressed up as one of the employees, how they were going to dress up that day, and that's how he did his physical pen test. I thought that was a great story, almost like a Hollywood type story. You could probably create a movie out of that or something, but it was just one of the ways that shows how much information we put on social media as organizations, as businesses, and personally, we know we've been putting on way too much information on social media.
Yeah, I think the point here is that, again, we're not saying don't sit and do nothing. It's important to work together to respond to events and all of that, but it has to be trust, right? And it has to be earned trust. So we start with zero trust first, right? Don't just trust an email that's coming to you saying that they're corporate IT. Validate, verify that source, as an example. Of course, at a rigid scale, that goes down to public-private key cryptography, but on other scales, it goes down to just picking up a phone and calling someone, or really just starting with that inherent zero trust model. I think is super important, because otherwise, if we don't have that model, it's too easy to fall prey to these attacks.
Right. Assume everyone's going to try and steal your candy or something, and trust no one initially.
Yeah, definitely. So those are all great tips, and we talk about a lot of the bad always that's happening, but we have in the past talked about the good, right? I like to always talk about that. There's been a lot of great progress we made in the industry in terms of fighting cybercrime, because it is a lucrative industry, as we know. There's a lot of great things we've done, especially with FortiGuard Labs working in the industry, from strengthening threat intelligence and the security fabric to disruptions and takedowns, even arrests we have worked on. To the left of the kill chain, we always talk about how do we stop the attack, mitigate it, make it more expensive for cyber criminals to operate. And there's a lot of work that's being done there, and a lot of good news, right, and initiatives. But on the right-hand side, which is, when an attack has happened, when cyber criminals are profiting, how do you do an arrest? That's much tougher. We've made some progress on that. But I just wanted to point out, on that side, just recently, there was an announcement from the Department of Justice that they had actually recovered over $2 million of Bitcoin related to the DarkSide ransom attack. And to me, that's another great win for the industry. It sends a message back to cyber criminals showing that they just can't assume because they've made profits that they're going to get away with these things.
Yeah. So first of all, always a win when you go after the criminals and go after their money. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people already wondering, well, exactly what was the technique, how the Department of Justice recovered those Bitcoins. I can't wait until that information comes out. There's some information that's been released, but a lot of people are guessing on what may have happened. I think hopefully they'll reveal it, because I think it will make a really interesting story. But on top of that, I think like the big point is, if you can go after the money, if you can make it more expensive for them, or if you can, make it harder for them to keep a hold of Bitcoins or cryptocurrency or whatever profit they may be making, it definitely hurts them, and it hurts them in a way that's much more valuable and much more, has much more of an impact than I would say like putting in even like tons of other types of systems or tons of other types of defenses. So go after the money, as we always say.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, we can't rely on that. We don't want to rely on the end game, right, on that right-hand side when it comes to that whole attack chain. But it's just great news that there is also help and assistance and things being done on that side. But to our point earlier, it's all about that whole ecosystem, how we strengthen that together. That is definitely shaping up and has shaped up over the last couple of years. So really looking forward to more initiatives happening there.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me make it clear, me and you can't go do that. Like, law enforcement has to do that. Me and you and organizations that we consult for, we have to, the best way we can prevent the attack from them is to go on the left side, is to prevent an attack before it occurs as much as we can, or have them have detection as close as we can to the time when the attack occurs. So I'm not saying don't do your due diligence in security products or security implementation.
Yeah, of course. It's all working together, right? It's from a technology and integration piece to an industry integration piece. Case in point, the work we do with Interpol Gateway and other critical partners too. All right, Amar, thanks so much for your time again. These talks always go by very fast, fascinating things, but it's good to end on some good news. Thanks for your thoughts again, Amar.
Hey, thank you.
All right, this is Derek Manky with FortiGuard Live, signing off.